the Constitutional Court is currently hearing an urgent application by the Electoral Commission of South Africa, which wants the local government elections postponed. The Commission contends that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it's unable to organize constitutionally compliant local government elections that will be free, fair and safe on the date of October the 27th. Joining us now to evaluate the IEC's prospects before the ConCourt is Professor Elmien du Plessis from the Northwest University's Faculty of Law. Professor, good to have you with us on the Daytime Update today. Perhaps let's start with the question that's top of mind for many, asking whether this particular case should indeed be before the Constitutional Court or if Parliament was the better body to approach. Your views and why?
Yes, so that's a very important question. I think the IEC makes it very clear in their argumentation. They're not asking for constitutional amendment. They merely ask to apply the impossibility, thereby postponing the election. So that's an interesting argument. They say, listen, we're not asking for the amendment of the Constitution, and that, of course, speaks to some of the concerns that people had that the Constitution will be amended by the Constitutional Court. Some parties argue, well, in substance, they are actually asking for amendment, so that's very interesting. But I think what is very important here is that South Africa so far is the only country that approached the courts to deal with this matter of not being able to hold elections. Even in the Montenegro report, even in the IEC's own founding affidavit, they name countries such as France and the UK, which dealt with this problem, even the USA and India, through the legislature, where they've either, like in the case of the UK, okay, they don't have a constitution as such, but in the UK they have promulgated a Coronavirus Act, and that act dealt with how you can hold or postpone elections. So I think that's a very important question. And one thing that keeps on coming up in the court case is, you know, they say, well, the voters, I don't think we have been asked really, but then in effect, if you are going to want to ask what do people say, you would surely have to ask our representatives in Parliament rather than the courts to deal with this matter. So I do think that in the terms of a democracy, the Parliament is better suited to deal with this, also because the IEC reports to Parliament. But I do also think because it's such an urgent matter at the moment and that Parliament won't be able to pass any legislation until October on this matter, probably, that is why they've approached the court. So it does bring in very, very interesting questions about democracy and who gets to make these decisions.
There are two interesting issues that you've brought up there that I'd like to hop on. The first one is, should the Constitutional Court at the end of this indeed say, go to Parliament and get an approval from Parliament, how will this then affect the IEC, its planning? How will this affect its timetables and the limitations therein?
Look, the IEC is arguing that they're already not really being able to comply, and that's part of the free and fair elections. They say we can hold elections, but it's not going to be free and fair because we already had to cancel our registration weekends. We're already behind schedule. So that's part of their argument. And I think if you then throw in going to Parliament, I don't think they will even get to the 27 October date. So I think that is really impossible now. I don't think they can go to Parliament now for postponement. But the question then, and that I think is why the court is in such a corner, you can't go to Parliament at the moment because there's just not enough time, but it's also not the place of the court to make these decisions. So I think that for me is the crux of the case. You ask the court to do something that's probably really bad in law, also bad in terms of democracy and who gets to make these decisions. But if the court doesn't grant the extension, then we are probably going to have elections that is not free and fair and unconstitutional. So I think it's a very, very tight spot for the Constitutional Court to be in.
You mentioned there as well, Professor, Parliament being where the voice of the people is. There is another, school of thought that says perhaps Parliament doesn't really represent the voices of the people, that if you were to get the voices of the people, you'd have to have a referendum in the country, and that one cannot expect either politicians in Parliament or even the justices in the Constitutional Court now to speak on behalf of the 60 million plus South Africans. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's a very long philosophical question as well. So what we know of public opinion on this question, the only study that I've seen so far is one done by UJ and the HRSC, and that found that 60% of people think that the elections must be postponed. So that's the only voice of the people study that I've seen so far, but of course it's a limitation of a study. It's not everybody. So that's really difficult. And I think, also looking at our voter turnout, which ironically is usually quite low, and might now even be lower if we continue in October, a very small percentage of people actually vote. So in terms of the bigger picture of South Africa, a very small percentage of people actually vote for people in parliament. So I think it's a valid question, but the question then is, who do we go to get the voice of the people? And would it be good to always call a referendum on every issue if there's an issue? Surely we elect people in parliament to make these decisions because we trust them to follow a certain policy direction, at least, that resonates with who we are or what we think our country should look like. So I think, as I said, it's a very big philosophical question, but I do think especially in an instance like that where decisions would have to be made on a relatively short basis. I would have thought, for instance, the IEC would have gone to Parliament in April already to say, listen, we need to report to you to say that it's going to be very difficult to have free and fair elections in October. Can you make a plan? And while you make a plan, we are going to run this parallel process of Judge Moseneke, etc., and then only use the court as a last resort. So I think that would have made me feel more comfortable in terms of our constitutional dispensation.
Well, Professor, we still await the outcome of what the Constitutional Court will rule regarding this, but certainly thank you very much for your insight as well as the various implications of even going to Parliament right now and what impact that would have on the IEC, as well as the timelines, as well as the constraints that the Constitutional Court itself has, that debate of whether or not it has the mandate to change the law, which we believe it doesn't, nor does it have the mandate to extend the term of the councillors as well as those who are in local government leadership. Professor Elmien du Plessis, thank you once again for your time now.